Welcome, everybody. Let's start tonight's school board work session of the Independent School District 279 School Board. It is Tuesday, May 9th, 2017, and the time is 6:07 p.m. Our mission is to inspire and prepare all students with the confidence, courage, and competence to achieve their dreams, contribute to community, and engage in a lifetime of learning. Our purpose for tonight is to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and, when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular school board meetings. Our topics for tonight are the World's Best Workforce Strategic Plan Priority Work Update. The Enrollment and Capacity Management Framework has been implemented to increase community trust in long-range planning for enrollment and building use, and superintendent's evaluation. Our outcomes tonight, board members will be informed about the fiscal year 2017 work of Enrollment and Capacity Management Advisory Committee, provide feedback on the superintendent recommendations for next action, and conduct the superintendent's evaluation. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. McGuire.
All right, thank you so much, Bob. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll just begin by going around and saying our names. I was going to say for the audio tape, and it's for the audio tape and the videotape tonight, and I'll explain a little bit about that. I'm Kate McGuire, I'm the superintendent.
Patricia Magnuson, Executive Director of Finance and Operations.
Mike Ostaffi, board member.
Margaret Weston, General Counsel.
Tim Wilson, Chief Technology Officer.
Heather Douglas, School Board.
Barb Olson, Director of School Community Relations.
Stephanie Porter, School Board Member.
Jim Burgett, School Board Member.
Judy McDonald, Executive Director of Human Resources.
Kelly Parpart, Assistant Superintendent.
Jessica Craig, School Board Member.
Brian Severson Hall, Executive Director of Community Engagement.
Bob Gerhart, School Board Member.
All right, thank you, everyone. You know, I can honestly say that in my entire career, I never really thought that I would be able to say that I'm excited to talk about the possibilities in front of us regarding building a school or potentially adjusting attendance areas. I never thought that I would say that I was excited about that. I am, however, excited about the work of the Enrollment and Capacity Advisory Committee that has been done to prepare for the conversation tonight. With the help of this new ongoing advisory committee, the Enrollment and Capacity Management Advisory Committee, we're having conversations about enrollment and building use in a more open, transparent way than we have ever done before. And I believe that the work of this committee is at such a high caliber that it will compare to our planning and development of the long-range financial planning work that we accomplished a number of years ago as a board-approved priority result. So I'm excited that we have both community members and staff members here tonight to share the work of the first year of this new committee and to make recommendations to you around the work that this committee has done. We're taping tonight, so we usually don't have work sessions here in the boardroom. We're here intentionally tonight as part of our efforts in having better, improved communication and transparency around this work. I know that you'll hear again during the presentation that all the work of this committee over the past 2 years, actually, both the task force that developed it and the committee this year is all online, has all been published and has been throughout the year, and that we've had improved communications in regular school board reports, for example. And our efforts tonight to be in the boardroom and videotape and live stream a work session, which we usually don't do, is part of our efforts of being better communicators around this issue and these topics. So we think that this will be helpful and that we'll get positive feedback about having this accessible to community members whenever we're talking about this particular topic now. So we're taping, live streaming this first report from the committee, but we're thinking that we'll probably do this every time now when we're talking about this particular topic in an effort to be more transparent and improve our communications around building use and enrollment and capacity management. So I'm thrilled to hand it over to Patricia, who will introduce other team members as they share information tonight.
Thank you, and good evening, school board members. I'm going to switch this over here. Superintendent McGuire and executive cabinet members, and all of the advisory committee members who are here tonight. Tonight's presentation will inform you about the 2016-17 work of the Enrollment and Capacity Management Advisory Committee, or ECMAC. You're going to hear us refer to it as ECMAC throughout the presentation tonight. Before we begin, I want to provide some context and map out what you're about to hear over the course of this next hour or so. We were very deliberate in how we set up this presentation. It intends to walk you first through the framework within which we are working, and then the advisory committee process that led to the observations and recommendations we're going to make tonight. We have made very important, and as Dr. McGuire said, transformational changes to our process by using the Enrollment and Capacity Management Framework. These changes were intended to increase community trust. For this reason, we view the ECMAC journey and the process that we have gone through as being just as important and perhaps more important than the recommendations themselves. So we will get to our recommendations, but they'll come near the end of the presentation. We will begin with the work of the ECMAC committee. First, we'll ground ourselves in the framework that led to the creation of our Enrollment and Capacity Management Advisory Committee. Second, we're going to hear from some community members as they describe their journey with the advisory committee. And then third, we're going to have some staff members who have served on ECMAC walk you through each section of the summary of progress report that's in your book. And finally, I'll walk you through the details of the ECMAC observations and recommendations. And then after each section, we'll give you a chance to ask questions and make comments. And then our presentation will end with a set of recommendations for next action. And those will come from Superintendent McGuire, and her recommendations result from the observations given to her by the ECMAC Advisory Committee. So I'm going to begin by walking you through the ECMAC framework. And this describes the process you're seeing us going through tonight. And again, we are using it to increase community trust in the school district through engagement in long-range planning for enrollment and building use. This is our framework. So again, we created this with the intent of increasing transparency and communication between Osseo area schools and the community it serves. So a couple of years ago, a task force of parents, school district staff, and community members was assembled, and this was in 2015. And their job was to create a framework that would identify, analyze, and communicate issues related to enrollment and capacity management. This task force engaged in an 18-month study of factors that affect facility use, and ultimately, in the spring of 2016, so about 1 year ago, they recommended the adoption of this framework that's illustrated in a slide. Bring this around here. So I want you to know that each color, shape, and word on the framework has a purpose. And I think it's important we really understand this framework because we're going to be living in this framework for a long time and hopefully managing our work within it. So vital to the framework is, first, you will notice that students are in the center of the framework. It keeps us mission-focused and clear about who this framework was designed to serve. That was really important to that original task force. And along the top of the framework, you'll notice that its purpose is to increase community trust in Osseo area schools through engagement in long-range planning for enrollment and building use. You will then see a color key right below that purpose. You'll notice a color key. There's a light blue box on the left, and that refers to the roles of the school board, the superintendent, and administrative staff. And then the dark blue little box, which is the color key along the right-hand side, refers to the roles of the ECMAC group. So that was the advisory group that was created as a result of this framework in order to do the work together. So the ECMAC work is depicted by those dark blue boxes going along the right-hand side of that outer circle. The inner circle surrounding the word students, so there's a circle in the middle with many arrows surrounding the word student. It depicts the ongoing work of staff members related to enrollment and capacity management. And those are things like projecting student enrollment, holding open enrollment lotteries, enrolling students at the enrollment center, considering building capacity, and ultimately recommending staffing levels aligned with projected enrollment and capacity. This ongoing work of the staff in the middle produces a lot of data. And that data then is provided to the ECMAC. And the data is depicted by that little arrow that comes out of the middle circle and goes out to the ECMAC Advisory Committee. So the ECMAC receives all this data, analyzes it, and uses it to make observations and recommendations. There's a summary of progress report that's in your binders tonight. We're going to walk you through that this evening. That includes all the data or some of the data we studied, as well as the ECMAC's observations and recommendations from the analysis. And these observations and recommendations, as we move along the outside of the circle on the right-hand side, are then passed off to the administration. And then we are assigned to communicate those observations to the board and the community. And if those recommendations result in change in specific areas, we as staff will design a community engagement process to solicit additional perspectives that will inform our work together. So whatever actions are recommended will affect ongoing staff work and the data that results from that work. So we make observations, they're funneled through staff, and now there's an arrow going back to the center. So then there might be an impact on the data. So as staff again does their processes, data might change, and then the cycle continues year after year. Among the most important components of this framework are the guiding principles. So that's that long box that's on the right-hand side of the framework itself. The observations and recommendations must be concise and informed by data. They must align with the district racial equity work. They must be sustainable. They must identify and examine the implications for all students. They must identify potential costs and consider funding strategies, and they must be made with as much advance notice as possible when change is recommended. So, with that framework as your backdrop, I'd like to invite some of our ECMAC community members. We have with us tonight Aleta Abdullah, Sujata Data, Bernadette Foer, Eric Javi, and Nick Castor. And they are going to come up to the podium and talk through their part of the presentation. These are just 5 of our 26-member team. It includes about 2/3 community members, about 1/3 staff members, and we also have 2 school board members on the committee. ECMAC membership is designed to reflect diverse perspectives of the families and community members served by Osseo area schools. Committee members were chosen in the spring of 2016, a year ago, through an application process, and they will serve either 2- or 3-year terms. Following each meeting, as Dr. McGuire said earlier, ECMAC work is posted on the district website, and reports are given at regular school board meetings. Just want to tell you a little bit about what they've done this year. During our first year, ECMAC members have visited multiple school facilities. They've learned about how building space is allocated to satisfy educational goals. They've studied enrollment projections. They analyzed current school attendance areas. They reviewed development plans from cities. They learned about the district student capture rate and competition in the K-12 marketplace. And they learned about the district's centralized enrollment function. And over the course of their first year as a committee, you guys are going to get tired, ECMAC members participated in 7 large group meetings with over 400 collective hours, 3 subcommittee meetings with over 35 collective hours, and multiple planning and preparation meetings with well over 200 collective hours. And 2 of our presenters this evening that are flanking our team over here, Bernadette and Nick, also served on the original 2015 task force that created the ECMAC framework, and both have continued their service on ECMAC. So thank you for that. You will also hear from our new ECMAC members, Eric, Sujata, and Aleta. So we'll get started with Bernadette.
My name is Bernadette Foer. During my time as part of the original task force in 2015, I became a valuable part of the district. Each and every one of us became stakeholders in the process, investing time, sharing ideas, and growing together. We envisioned a process where every decision will be student-centered, which became the core of the framework and the reason why I chose to stay on, because it showed that the district really cared. Staff did not take decisions lightly. They weighed all options, and always worked in the best interest of the students they served. I became motivated as a parent and as a community member and an integral part of ECMAC. And I vowed to become an ambassador for the school district, not just because it benefited my 2 children in this school district, but for the many other families who are affected by the work of the school district. These slides expressed hopes of the various ECMAC members at our first meeting in August of 2016. We had hopes such as build strong bridges, learn and give back, increase community trust, and improve transparency. We referred back to these hopes often during the year, and at our final meetings, we evaluated and affirmed that through the work of ECMAC, we are making progress toward these expressed hopes. Thank you.
My name is Eric Hazy. This was the first year of my participation in this work. One of the things I most enjoyed about our work this year was that meetings were held at various schools throughout the district. We met at Palmer Lake, Northview, Basswood, and Osseo Senior High. I gained a clearer understanding of the district. I learned about the important work that principals engage in and how they utilize their buildings to impact student achievement. And I was able to be in buildings and meet district leaders that I may not have met otherwise. I really enjoyed the visit to Palmer Lake Elementary, which was our first site location. We were able to observe Principal Chan intentionally engage the facility to transform and approach their learning. This site is a good example of how capacity is used for specialized programming such as science and music. Sites with less available capacity, such as Basswood, which we also visited, do not have the option to use space in the same way. Overall this year has been very informative and I learned a lot. I plan to return next year because there are things that I still think I can help with. I believe that there is trust being built through our work.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sujata Data. Throughout each meeting, the staff brought forward data points which they work on a daily basis. They work to develop explanations and graphical depictions of the data, and that helped us with the understanding of complex issues of enrollment and capacity, which was then being able to translate to the community. So for me, the challenge was the data was all forecast driven. And I know as a supply chain management professional, and I use data and forecast on a regular basis, that forecast can be done only to a certain extent. There can be certain other aspects that affect the forecast, which then can affect the forecast and can make it incorrect. So I know, and I would hope that the community understands and remembers that the forecast can change, and that's not because of some work that we or the district is doing. It's because of certain other factors that affect it. So I know that this is a challenge, and I hope that people keep that in mind when they're looking at the data and the things that are being presented to them. Yet, for me, what was surprising and very, very good was that the staff had all this data, and the amount of work that they were putting in to create this data and to present us with the data so we could understand it and have a very scientific approach towards analyzing the data and understanding it. So that was very important to me because I needed that science behind the analyzing, and it was not just opinions or something off someone's hat kind of a thing. So that was the important aspect for me, that despite the challenges, the staff was able to give us like scientific data that we could rely on.
This photo shows the large poster-sized pages of the reports which we edited over the span of 2 meetings. This process was very rewarding. We formed teams, brainstormed, collaborated on ideas, and shared experiences that gave the district insight in the implications of potential decisions. We learned about vital issues like boundary changes, implications on potential decisions, and school sizes. This knowledge allowed us to see multiple sides of enrollment and capacity management issues and help us guide the district in telling these complex stories to the community through this first report. I appreciated this experience because it increased my trust in the district and the work they do. Our work together improved communication and our knowledge in the system, and the transparency is evident in this meeting today. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Aleta Abdullah. Thank you for having me here today. I was asked to share my journey because of some things that I had shared during one of our first meetings. My oldest daughter attended a school here in Osseo District, which is how I found out about ECMAC, and made me interested in the process. I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting into. It had a very long name. It was very involved. And I was very interested to see what the work was about. I thought I was going to be able to come in and see if we could fix the bus times, because that was one of the issues that I had with her. Ultimately, I moved them all to charter school, only because my oldest son was there and he was having a good experience. However, after having spent this past school year in Osceo's district with the ECMAC committee, it has made me want to move them back into the district schools. It has increased my trust in the district. I had heard from a neighbor when I first moved about one of the schools that my children were assigned to, and it wasn't a very positive review. And so that's how they ended up in charter school. And needless to say, I'm finding that sometimes it's better to really dig deep and find out more about a district before you just go off of the opinions of others. One of the things that really helped me to understand the visions of the schools here in Osseo District was holding the meetings at the schools and on location. It wasn't just held here at the ESC, and this is a nice place. However, it was really, really interesting to see some of the great facilities that exist here within our school systems that, you know, many people may not know about. And it gives us a lot of different views. So my impressions about the district are that the district is intentional. And I'm finding that out not just from this committee, but I've also served on the recruitment and retention committee. And one thing I am appreciating about Osseo District is that it is very, very intentional, not about just the work, but about being transparent and keeping community informed and being a part of that work, because it affects the community just as much as it affects those who are within the schools. So the idea and the goal is to be as equitable as possible for all students. And I appreciate being a part of that, and you as a district opening your arms to the community to be a part of this process. One of the things that I've told Patricia time and time again, when they talked about the projections for which schools would have which numbers, it was absolutely amazing to me to see how close they were in predicting where children would go to school and how many students would be there. And for the amount of students in this district to have that level of precision in the work tells me how good you guys are, okay? And so that really very much impressed me. So one of the things that, like I said, I really appreciated was the fact that as this work is being done, it was decided not to go into it on your own in a room behind closed doors, but to open your doors and to welcome the community to be a part of this process. And now I feel like I'm a part of the Osseo family. So I plan to stay on the committee because it is meaningful work, and it means a lot to me to see how this process is going to not just affect the schools, but affect the communities in which we live. And I'm learning more and more about how this work impacts schools in ways that I may have never thought of before. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to continue serving with you and being a partner with the district.
Good evening. My name is Nick Castor. As was indicated earlier, I served on the initial task force that created ECMAC and then served this year on ECMAC. Like Aleta, I too was invited to talk about my journey of how I came to serving on these two committees. And unfortunately, I have to say it was a very negative event in our educational career that led me to standing in front of you today. I'm the dad of Teddy. He's a happy third grader at Basswood, and we are absolutely delighted with Basswood and all the opportunities they have provided to Teddy. When we first enrolled Teddy at Basswood, it was his first experience with public schools and mine. Frankly, I had significant reservations about enrolling Teddy in public school because I didn't know whether public school could provide the opportunities that I had the advantage of when I was younger. I just didn't know. So what I saw in the news was my reality. Despite my initial reservations, we enrolled Teddy at Basswood and we were elated. Principal Smith, Mrs. Ramadka, fabulous. We were just over the moon with Basswood. Unfortunately, and for some reason I've yet to really comprehend, I distinguished Basswood from the school district. So sometime in the winter of Teddy's kindergarten year, I don't know if it was an email from a neighborhood committee member or something we received from the school district, but there was going to be a boundary change. And Teddy was going to go somewhere else. We were going to leave this great community. He had friends and he was thriving, and we were going to go somewhere else. Now, I understand that this needs to happen. There's lots of things that go on that, mandate a boundary change or, these things happen. We understood that. What we didn't understand is how was this a surprise to us? How did we not know about this? Both my wife and I consider ourselves pretty engaged people and pretty resourceful when it comes to gleaning information from a variety of sources, but this was out of the blue. We had no information that the boundary change was going to happen. We had very little information about the school to which Teddy was going to be transferred. And the timing of all of this was such that we had very little time to investigate alternatives. I remember sitting at our kitchen counter with my wife and Teddy playing in the other part of the house, and we had applications to Wayzata. We had open enrollment to charter schools, to magnet schools. We had Providence, Blake, and Breck. All of those applications sitting on our kitchen table, and we didn't know what we were going to do. That was terrible. And the worst part about it was that we felt Teddy was an anonymous student who was fungible and merely a revenue source for the school. There was no consideration for his experience or what it would do to his family if the school district moved him. To me, that was unacceptable. That inspired me to do something. I was so happy to learn that the school district was going to make a change, to invite community members to participate in a process that investigated and examined how do we make decisions about boundary changes? How do we make decisions about how schools are going to be used? And as me as just an ordinary dad who, Teddy's dad, it was awesome. I was invited to participate in something that was meaningful and something that was designed to prevent other families from having to endure what we did. I was, again, I hate to use the phrase again, but I was over the moon to be invited, and I'm so happy that I participated in this process. So I've done this. I've been on the task force and then ECMAC, and I've met countless staff members. I see Christian and Dale sitting over there. They've been there from the beginning. And my interactions with them and other staff members have reassured me that Teddy is not some fungible student, but that the folks that are making decisions about what happens to our students are deliberate, intentional, and very thoughtful. In addition to that, they are very capable and very, very good at what they do. So as a result, I am now a willful ambassador for the Osseo area school districts I'm not sure how it became known that I sit on these committees, but people do ask me what's happening, what's going on, and I'm happy to share with them this is a very deliberate process. This is how it works. This is the things that we look at. And, I can't promise that there will never, ever be, things that change in the future, but I can say you will have notice. You will have the ability to think about these things and not feel that you have to have 7 different applications for different schools on your kitchen table at one time and just tearing your hair out thinking about what is going to happen to your child the next school year. At the very final ECMAC meeting, we were invited to provide some adjectives about how we felt about the work. And the 2 that I came up with were engaged. Again, here I am, Teddy's daddy, at the table talking about how do we make changes, how do we inform parents, how do we inform community members about possibilities that are going on out there, how do we make this a better process for everybody involved. And I was really excited. I am truly a voluntary ambassador, and I'm happy to share the story of ECMAC and the way that decisions will be made in the future. And I am more than confident that Teddy is Teddy. He's not student number XYZ123 and just some revenue source. So I really do appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to serving in the future.
So, thank you, all of you, very much. So board members, I want you to know that the participation of these community members in ECMAC has been tremendously valuable. We could not have done it without them. I am personally thankful for their commitment to Osseo area schools and their interest in supporting the district through this work. There's lots of ways for parents to get involved, and that they would want to participate here is really meaningful and important work, and I just want you to know that. So now they can take some questions from you, or you can any comments you might have, and then we'll give them an opportunity to sit in the audience or go home to their children.
Board members, we want to just pause here for a minute. Oh, thank you, Barb, for a reminder about the microphone. And I'll share my microphone with you, Nick, and whoever else needs it as well. But board members, we just wanted to pause here for a minute and honor and appreciate the work of the community members who engaged in the process, and to see if you had some things about their experience maybe that you were wondering about, or questions about their experience that you might like to ask them. And then I'll invite them just to share any other thoughts that they might have about their experience as well. Is there anything you're, and cabinet members, I don't want to leave you out, because this is the first full conversation with the team that you've had as well. So are there things that you're wondering about? So feel free.
I'd just like to start with thanking the committee members. Thank you for coming and sharing your stories, and for those of the committee that isn't here. I was there when that conversation was taking place, Nick, and it did not feel right. And I'm so glad that we are being intentional and improving the process and learning and involving the committee. Because if you go even back before that, the why I'm sitting in this chair was because of boundary changes for my child. So I understand the conflict, and it helps so much to have the community involved to help us understand the people we serve, and to do the best we possibly can. So thank you all so much for your contributions. And I had wondered in the past, what were these back deal meetings that might have been happening? You know, the conspiracy theories start to swirl, and then you realize there really weren't any conspiracies. But I just didn't feel involved, and my voice wasn't heard at the time. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I have a quick question. When you learned of the boundary changes, did you have the option to open enroll, continue your child in Basswood? No. That was not an option. Okay, thank you.
And to make a comment, I was at some of the meetings where the pitchforks were out. And, one of the reasons I'm here today, as you said, is because of the way that was handled in the past. So, and I applied to the ECMAC committee 3 years ago. I didn't get on, again, which is why I'm here. Some of you made a bad choice. So, no, thank you for doing that work. I've been in the last couple meetings, as now I'm on the board, and experiencing where it's come in that period of time. So thank you all for doing that work.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for allowing me to be a part of your team this year. And also, Nick, I was there also with a kindergartner and third grader at the time when that happened, which also is a part of why I am sitting at this table today too. And so I appreciate all the groundwork that you've laid in the committee and the rest of you on the task force and the committee. You've really contributed a lot, and not just you five sitting here, but everybody just getting to work with you and hear all your stories has been really inspirational. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I just wanted to echo everybody else's thanks. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy lives to make decisions about this important topic that you guys are working on, and I'm excited to learn about everything you guys have found.
I'll jump in here. I'd like to repeat some of the thanks that have been going around already for stepping up to become real leaders in your own neighborhoods and communities. I do have one question though. Now that you've gone through a little bit of a transformation from being community member to insider, I'm making air quotes here, and you're getting questions from the community, are you hearing things that sound like maybe what you sounded like prior to being on this group? And how are you reacting to that when you're sharing with these other community members who aren't part of ECMAC or part of some other group?
Absolutely. Like, for me, the questions are the same, and I see myself in those shoes, but one of the biggest consolation for me is the fact that I tell them that it's more transparent now. And most often I refer them to the website where they're able to see some of the reports to show, because the biggest thing that I focus on is evidence that their decisions are not just being made by the school district, but there are people who are invited from the community to be part of those discussions, and it helped allay some of the fears or anxieties that parents have for children. So I see myself in those shoes, and I'm happy that I can at least direct people to where answers can be found.
Thank you.
Cabinet members or anyone else have questions or anything that you're wondering about the work of the group from the perspective of the community, these community members that you're wondering about?
For any of you, what most surprised you as you began to look at the data? And where did you feel that, yeah, your opinions or your thoughts were pretty much validated? Anyone? What surprised you, or what confirmed your thoughts?
Hi, I think I mentioned this to Ms. McGuire earlier, that we moved from the UK. So for me, to know about the education system was very important, and this provided me with the opportunity to actually get involved in it and to understand it. And as I mentioned, data was really important, because as part of my job, I use a lot of data, and we use a lot of forecasting techniques, and we try to make it as close as possible. And like Aleta said, when we saw this data and what the staff gave us, we were like, wow. You know, like, especially for me, because I know that I work with data and I know the challenges involved with that. Despite all those challenges, the staff is able to provide the data. They have a science behind it. They see historical data and then create forecasts and things like that. So for me, it was reinforcing my ideas about data and forecast, but how well they were used, to analyze data. So it's really important for me. I think all of us might say the same thing, that one, the district is doing so much to create transparency within the community. And me as an outsider, I do not know much about the American education system. But now, 1 year down the line, I feel much more engaged and involved and informed about it. And then to talk about, we're not just pulling numbers off, the hat or something like that. It has got a lot of, basis with which we are doing all of this analysis and then coming up with this recommendation. So it's been a great experience, and also logic. There's a lot of science behind everything, so that's important.
I was just going to echo Sujata. The data was really, it was very powerful, mind-blowing. I've been working with some data as well, and it it doesn't always tell the story. And one thing about being a part of this committee is that we were able to see the story, or as I like to call it, the narrative behind the numbers. And that was meaningful to me. And it actually did surprise me. I just never thought that working with numbers on this level, and as intense and as complicated as it really is, would be as interesting as it turned out to be. And it really helped me now when I pass by a school that I didn't know anything about before, I'll say, okay, they're using this room for this, and then now they have this special program, and oh, that takes up 2 classrooms. So, you know, different things. And I, unlike Sujata, I grew up, my father was a teacher for 40 years, my grandmother was a teacher, so I've grown up in the American education system, but I've never seen this side of things. So to see the numbers and how well Patricia and her staff have really, I mean, that really just, and I can't say that enough, because for that number of students to have that level of precision in terms of a forecast, as you say, that's huge. That's really huge. So I don't know what you all have worked out behind the scenes to make that magic happen, but to see it in action was, you know, kind of like Disney World. It was kind of magical. It really was.
I just want to add one more thing. You guys have said thank yous to us, but we also, I hope I can say it for everyone, that we want to thank you for providing us the opportunity to get involved in our children's education and to, in some small way, contribute to some positive change. So thank you. Yes. Thanks, Patricia, for giving us the opportunity to get involved. So thank you.
I just want to thank you as well and take a moment to publicly thank you. We've heard from Patricia often. You know, she gives us updates about the work of your committee, and she has always spoken so fondly of the community members that are involved in the work, and has nothing but outstanding things to say about each of you. So to see you and to hear you personally has truly been an honor. I remember after hearing all of you get done speaking, I turned to Judy and I said, wow, that was powerful. That was powerful. So 2 things. I want to thank you for your commitment to community, our school communities, your role models for our students on our mission statement, and how you can be, you know, lifelong learners and have a lifelong commitment to community. So thank you for volunteering your time to do that, because again, from our regular updates from Patricia, it's a tremendous amount of time. And then especially to Nick and Aleta, thank you for your personal narratives. It's powerful. All of you were your sentiments you shared tonight were very powerful, so thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to add anything to what was most surprising to you, maybe, and then I'll transition?
Sure, I'll be very brief. We've heard a lot about transparency. In my experience, transparency can be a double-edged sword. I think of when you go to the bank to sign a mortgage, all of the disclosures, all the transparent items that are set in front of you in a stack of documents that are this big. I'm a lawyer. I can honestly say I have never read all of the documents that are given to me before I sign the mortgage. And so I think in being transparent, where I really see the value of our work is that family members and community members can rest assured that there is a group of people who come from a diverse background. We have a variety of perspectives that are looking at all of this stuff. And in the spirit of being transparent, we produced a report at the end of our work that said, we looked at the stuff and here's what we think. This is our collective opinion. So that instead of having to sift through, you know, web page after web page or document after document, they can look at this relatively short document and say, okay, this, I can believe this. These people look like me. They come from my neighborhood. So I really see a tremendous amount of value in what we're doing. I think it's a fabulous step forward. And I really do believe it will build trust within the community.
Do you want to add anything?
No.
Thank you very much. Just by way of last comment, I again want to thank you. I agreed to you and thanked you when you came in, and I'm hopeful that the process that you experienced and that Patricia's been leading, and the journey that you described, I'm hopeful that others will see this as characteristic of our organization. Specifically, that it reflects, which is our intention, doesn't always happen the way you intend, which is why course correction is necessary, right? But that it reflects some of our core values about being a lifelong learner. So part of what got us into this journey was people being willing to provide feedback on their experience and make suggestions about how we can get better, and then engaging in a process and designing a process that we thought would help us get better and do this work better, because you have to do this work. School districts have to manage their buildings and capacity and their enrollment. And that I'm hopeful that it also reflects our commitment as an organization and our core values to being lifelong learners. You know, where people show up for work every day doing the best that they can and learn every day about how to do that even better. And that it reflects our core values about the importance of better decision-making occurring when we have multiple perspectives engaged in some kind of a collaborative process. So I'm glad that you reflected back in the story about your journey what we intend about living and behaving in accordance with our core values. So I want you to know how much I appreciate you sharing that, so that we can reflect on your experience even now and just continue to make this process better and better. So thank you so much. And Patricia, I think we're back to you at this time, right?
Yep.
And then we're going to have some other staff members come forward,
yep.
right?
I
Okay.
want to, as they're
Thank you.
transitioning in the spirit of lifelong learning, I just have to brag on a couple of our members, because Sujata is graduating this week with her master's in engineering. So on top of being a mom and doing all of this, and Bernadette is graduating next week from the University of Minnesota with the law, from the law school at the University of Minnesota. So they have done so much for us, and I know they do so much for their families and their communities, and then they're lifelong learners all at the same time. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, we're going to start going through the summary of progress report. So I want you to refer to that document. It's in your binder. I think I'm just going the wrong way here on this. Here we go. And you're going to see there's some tabs that are along the side. And we're going to refer to these documents throughout the presentation. So we've tabbed them off for you. So the first tab, that's in orange, marks pages 6, and then the document behind it, page 7. And these are tables from our observations and recommendations section. There's a blue tab. That is on page 11 of the document. It's a chart from our enrollment section that Gerald will talk about in a little bit. Our yellow page is on page 16, our yellow tab, and that is a map from our enrollment section. And page 19, Dale will talk about this bar graph from our capacity section. So as we move through the summary of progress report, you're going to start to see a familiar pattern. And as Dr. McGuire said, it's very similar to the long-range financial planning process. The FMX team relies upon specific tools, so those 4 that we just marked in your document for you. And those tools will be updated every year, and they're going to be consistently used to inform our annual process of developing observations and recommendations. So we hope that a pattern will emerge, and folks will have a long lead time as we make decisions. So at this time, our FMX staff members, we have Christian Olson, Gerald Edwards, Dale Karlstrom, and Barb Olson, and I are going to walk you through each section of the summary of progress report. I want you to also know that BJ Ermiter, who is our K-12 operations coordinator, is also a staff member on our FMX team, but could not be with us tonight. So shout out to BJ. But keep in mind that we will get to our specific observations and recommendations later in the presentation. So we've given you the framework, and now we want to walk through the data that was used to make our observations and recommendations. And we believe it's very important to build this foundational understanding of the process, especially in this first year. We want the school board and the community to clearly understand that our process, our input and the data analysis is very different than it has been in the past. So if you just go to that tab that shows you the summary of progress report. So behind the title page, which is in the front, and then there's a table of contents, you're going to find first the executive summary. And that's pages 1 through 3 of the report. And it describes the advisory committee's process, and it outlines the observations and recommendations. And the executive summary is liftable, which means you could read that and you could understand what's in the report without reading through the rest of the details. So it could just stand on its own. But now we'll take you through each section of the report, and we'll start with Christian.
Hi, my name is Christian Olson. I'm the Enrollment Services Coordinator for the district. And I'm going to walk you through Section 1 on pages 4 through 10 of the report, or the easy way to get there in the middle of it is just go to the orange tab. Right? And that's the Observations and Recommendations section. One of ECMAC's guiding principles for observation and recommendations is that they will be guided and informed by data. Through that lens, you'll hear this evening that these are data-informed observations and recommendations for study for potential action. They should not be construed to imply that action will be taken in any of these areas or to include judgment or opinion about the merits of any such action. During the 18-month process of creating the ECMAC framework, the original task force identified 5 potential actions that could result from the observations and recommendations about enrollment and building use. These observations and recommendations could be made following study during any year. And you can see them up there on the screens. They are attendance area adjustments, building a school, constructing additions to a school, closing a school, or doing nothing at that particular time. This year's Summary of Progress report includes recommendations for study for potential action in 3 of these areas: attendance area adjustments, building a school, and constructing additions to a school. While closing a school is a possible outcome that exists within the Enrollment and Capacity Management Framework, the Advisory Committee found no reason to recommend study of a potential school closure at this time. While in some years ECMAC could recommend that no action is necessary, this year the ECMAC recommended study of one additional issue, which you will hear more about later in the presentation: increasing enrollment at one of the district's elementary magnet schools. We will now walk you through the data portion of the report.
Good evening. My name is Gerald Edwards. I'm the Coordinator of Information Systems. For this section, you will want to refer to page 11, which is the blue tab located in your binder. This enrollment projection tool, which has been used by district staff for many years. The enrollment data is described in more detail in Section 2 in the Summary Progress Report on pages 11 through 16. This report describes the way we build grade-level 5-year enrollment projections. I will walk you through some high points of this process this evening. It begins with the use of birth rate in Hennepin County in order to project the future kindergarten enrollment. Next, the enrollment projection at grades 1 through 12 are calculated using the enrollment trend data over a 6-year period. This method allows us to predict how many students may continue from one grade level to the next. For example, on the enrollment projection tool, you can see that in 2016-17, there were 1,518 students in kindergarten. Based upon the 6 years of trend data, we project that the kindergarten group will decline to 1,502 students at first grade. In other words, fewer than 100% of the kindergarten's student numbers will continue to first grade. This is due to the family moves, family decisions, other factors that cause students to move into and out of our district. There is an important consideration in the use of the projection method. It can only be relied upon to create reasonable enrollment projections when historical patterns can be expected to hold into the future. When a break in pattern can be predicted, projections are adjusted to reflect the pattern break. Breaks in pattern can be caused by housing development, opening of a charter or private school within the district, or other programs or other attendant changes caused by students enrolling into and out our district. The enrollment tool has boxes around the breaks in pattern that we identified and used in creating the 2017 and 2018 enrollment projections. For example, grade 9 has grown at a faster than normal pace since the 2015-2016, when grade span changed. The break in pattern was considered in the projection because it is reasonable to predict that this pattern of increased growth of ninth grade will continue. FMX studied these enrollment projections and will assist the district in continually improving and monitoring the accuracy of these projections over time. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dale Karlstrom. I'm the Director of Facilities and Transportation Operations. For this section, you'll want to refer to page 19, which is the report under the green tab. And this is the elementary capacity tool that was developed last summer. Capacity data is described in this section 3 of the report on page 17 through 19. And the report describes in detail the methodology used to build a model to evaluate capacity for elementary schools. One important learning for the committee is the capacity is not a fixed number for any school. The concept of capacity is not a fixed number and was a critical foundational fact. We spent quite a bit of time on this because it is fundamental to understanding building usage and the enrollment implications. The number of students in a building can accommodate, or its capacity, is affected by the number of factors, including class size targets for the grade level served, the number of grade levels served in the building, any funds used to reduce class size, the educational needs of students for grade level classrooms, any specialized needs in the school's educational programs such as arts, music, technology, and science, and any specialized educational needs of students such as special education and English learners. Programs located at schools at the direction of school districts such as special education and preschool, and finally, programming identified by the site principal, teachers, and staff intended to satisfy specific needs for student populations and school communities such as large motor rooms and meeting spaces. Because the manner in which space is used by a particular school is determined in large part by the students it serves, the number of students that can be served by a school varies. For instance, a magnet school specializing in visual or performing arts may require larger spaces to accommodate its curriculum than a school providing a traditional curriculum. To better assess how elementary classroom space is being used in each school, the ECMAC relied on the 2017 elementary capacity analysis, which is depicted on page 19 in the report. The 2017 elementary capacity analysis is a metric that compares two things. First, the number of schools in each building that are appropriately sized and equipped for elementary grade level instruction, meaning they could be a classroom. And second, the number of rooms actually used to provide grade level instruction. For 2017, district-wide average elementary grade level classroom was calculated at 65.2%. This is depicted by the black horizontal line on the elementary capacity tool. We measured capacity usage as a variation from the district average. For example, Woodland and Zanewood are using identified total classrooms at their schools at the same rate as the district average. while Crestview is below the district average and Basswood is above the district average. The ECMAC will continue to study this measure over time. Staff spent last summer completing the elementary capacity model. One of the staff projects for the coming summer is to create a secondary capacity model. In the meantime, the ECMAC used a proxy for identifying capacity at secondary schools. The proxy we used was the status of being open or closed to open enrollment for the first lottery. Thank you.
Board members, you heard from several of the fabulous members of this year's committee, and I'd like to point you to the final section of the report, pages 20 to 24, section 4, that provides more information about the 2016-2017 Advisory Committee. We are currently recruiting members for next year's committee, so I'd like to spend a couple minutes talking a little bit about that. A copy of the application for ECMAC membership is included in the Summary of Progress report. It's also available on the district website, district279.org. Community members who would like to be considered for ECMAC membership beginning in the fall of 2017 may complete the application and submit it by the May 26th deadline. Next year's application timeline and the meeting dates have already been established and are outlined on this slide. We're promoting the application in multiple ways. We've sent an automated message to all enrolled families, and we'll do another reminder message before the deadline. We're using our 279 Connect Parent e-newsletter several times, having articles in local media, posts on social media, and of course the ISD outdoor sign. And I'd like to report that as of this afternoon, we've had 14 applications so far. So between now and May 26th, of course, we're looking for many, many more.
So you have heard the ECMAC journey from our community members and learned about the tools that were used to analyze data in order to make observations and recommendations for potential action within the next 2 to 5 years. At this time, I'm going to outline in greater detail the observations and recommendations that emerged from the ECMAC's first year of work. So now I'd like you to refer to the Enrollment and Capacity Summary tool in your packet, and it's the orange tab. And it's included as page 6 and 7 of the report. You're going to want to just keep that out, and I'm going to walk you through that. So page 6 is for elementary, and the page behind it, page 7, is for secondary. So you're going to notice color-coded boxes on the tool. And the boxes that are blue are the areas that we focused on because they represent major differences from district average capacity or high projected change in enrollment over the next 5 years. So those are the blue boxes. So if you move down these left-hand column of colored boxes, this is the on the elementary tool, you'll notice that there's 6 schools that have blue boxes around them. That means they have a current capacity usage that's either 10% above or 10% below that district identified average that Dale talked about. So those schools are Birch Grove, Crestview, Park Brook, Basswood, Oakview, and Rush Creek. And our aim was not to apply judgment by using colors like red or green to organize the data. The numbers in each box indicate whether the school is above or below the district average. The color blue simply indicates an ECMAC observation of a difference from the district average. So then if you move over to the right-hand side where the enrollment boxes are, you'll notice again 6 schools that have enrollment growth or enrollment decline of greater than 10% over the next 5 years. And these schools are Garden City, Park Brook, Zanewood, Cedar Island, Fernbrook, and Oakview. Again, the numbers in the box indicate whether the school is currently projected to grow or decline in enrollment over the next 5 years. So to make our recommendations, we considered both sets of data together. So if you move down the tool and look at them together, here's what you're going to notice. We've got Garden City and Fernbrook being recommended for study due to their projected enrollment growth. So if you look at the enrollment side, Garden City above 10%, and then move down to Fernbrook, also above 10%. Then you'll notice Birch Grove and Crestview are recommended for study due to their building use, with grade level classroom usage below the district average for elementary schools. So Birch Grove and Crestview being recommended because of the capacity side of this model. Then next, you'll notice that Parkbrook is not included in our final recommendations because its lower than average capacity, which is depicted on the left-hand side, is offset by its projected 5-year enrollment growth. So we think it's going to correct itself over time. And this condition also holds true for Oakview. Basswood and Rush Creek are being recommended for study because their building capacity use is currently above the district average for elementary schools. And finally, Cedar Island and Zanewood are being recommended for study due to projected enrollment decline. So that's how we selected the schools, as you heard, through a data-driven process. Then the next page is for secondary schools. So if you move down the left-hand side of that tool, or the capacity side, you will notice that there are 2 schools that were not available for the first open enrollment lottery for next school year, 2017-2018. You heard from Dale that this is the proxy we are currently using to assess capacity at the secondary schools. The schools that were not available in the first open enrollment lottery are Maple Grove Middle School and Maple Grove Senior High School. Again, our aim on this document was not to apply judgment by using colors like red or green to organize the data. The color blue simply indicates a condition that the ECMAC has observed about capacity in that case. Then if you move over to the right-hand side of the tool, you notice that there is one school, Osseo Senior High, that has projected enrollment change of 10% or more over the next 5 years. Now for secondary schools, you should also note that Park Center Senior High has projected enrollment growth of greater than 5%, and Maple Grove Senior High has projected growth of almost 5%. And as you heard from Gerald, because the overall growth at all 3 senior high schools, combined with the condition of Maple Grove Senior High not being available for open enrollment, we have recommended that we study all 3 of the senior high schools. Now at this time, we are not making a recommendation to study Maple Grove Middle School because of the flat enrollment projection for that school. So all of that data we placed onto a map. And this map was produced at the request of ECMAC. And it was designed to help our community understand, and our committee, understand the 8 cities that are a part of our school district and the location of the district schools. And it's on page 16 of the report, which is also tabbed in yellow. So if you can kind of take a closer look at the map that's embedded in there, you'll notice the color coding, all of the communities within the school district, and the communities that border the school district are indicated.
Page 14? 14.
Page 14 is the yellow tab.
And that's for the map.
That's for the map.
The map, yep.
Okay.
That's the map that we're looking at. Now what you'll notice on the slide is we've added, just for purposes of this presentation, some arrows to the slide. And so what those arrows indicate are the data and observations that we made on page 6 and 7. So the blue boxes, we've placed them now onto the map in the form of these arrows. So the purple arrows on the map depict our 5-year enrollment trends. So if you've got a purple arrow that faces upward, it means that there's projected enrollment growth of more than 10%. So right now we're looking at the elementary schools. So you see an upward pointing arrow at Garden City. I wonder if I can make this. So over here at Garden City. You also see it at Oakview. Right here, an upward facing arrow, Parkbrook, Fernbrook. So those schools. And then you've got downward arrows showing a projected enrollment decline of more than 10%. And that's at 2 schools. You're going to notice that at Cedar Island and also at Zanewood. So those are the purple arrows. Now we've got some orange arrows over here. Here's your key. Those depict capacity usage for the current year for 16-17. So if you've got an upward facing arrow, it depicts current capacity usage that is 10% above the district average for elementary schools. So you're going to see that over here at Rush Creek and at Basswood. And if you've got a downward arrow on the map, it depicts current capacity usage that is 10% below the district average for elementary schools. So you see that here at Oak View, Park Brook, Crestview, and at Birch Grove. So these were the schools that we considered to be recommended for study. And so as we said earlier, you'll notice that there's opposing forces at Park Brook. We've got capacity usage that's below the district average by more than 10%, but an upward trend, greater than 10% in enrollment that we are predicting. That same condition holds at Oakview. So we did not include those two schools in the final recommendation. This next slide uses the same map, and now we've put arrows for the secondary schools. And it's got both middle schools and senior high schools. And again, the purple arrows depict 5-year enrollment trends. And as we said, an upward purple arrow depicts projected enrollment growth of more than 5% or 10%. So we're using both 5 and 10 at secondary schools because of the growth that's happening at 9th grade. So 5% growth is depicted with a purple dotted line. 10% growth in enrollment is a more solid line. And then again, the orange is our observation about capacity. So you'll notice on the secondary that all of the enrollment trends are facing upward. That shows that each of the senior high schools is expected to have enrollment growth of either 5% in the case of Park Center and Maple Grove, or 10% at Osseo Senior High, and that's over the next 5 years, that growth. All of the middle schools are projected to have a less than 5% change in enrollment in the next 5 years, so they're not noted on the map, and we did not have a recommendation for study in the ECMAC report for any of the middle schools. And as noted earlier by Dale, for secondary schools, we are using a proxy for capacity, which is the school's status of being available for open enrollment at the first lottery. So you're going to see the upward-facing arrows that are orange at Maple Grove Senior High and at Maple Grove Middle School. So due to projected enrollment growth, the committee's recommendation includes studying potential additions at these 3 comprehensive high schools. Maple Grove Middle School did not emerge for recommended study at this time due to flat projected enrollment in the next 5 years. The committee will continue to monitor the status of this school over time. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk about her recommendations for next action.
That's so great.
Board members, I am recommending that we take action to study the areas that were identified by the Enrollment and Capacity Management Advisory Committee. I recommend that we study possible options for increasing the size of the attendance areas for Cedar Island, Crestview, and Zanewood in order to increase enrollment at those schools. I further recommend that we study possible options for reducing the size of the attendance areas at Basswood, Fernbrook, Garden City, and Rush Creek in order to lower enrollment at those schools. These potential actions could occur within the next 2 to 5 years, and we should also keep in mind that attendance area changes to these schools would impact the attendance areas of other schools in the district. Any recommended action for attendance area adjustment would also require school board approval in accordance with Policy 725, would be communicated with as much advance notice as possible, and would include a process for community feedback. I recommend that we study potential strategies to increase enrollment at Birch Grove Elementary School for the Arts, within the next 2 to 5 years. Birch Grove does not have an assigned attendance area. It's one of our magnet schools, so the attendance is 100% through a lottery process. So strategies to increase enrollment could include a school-specific marketing plan, for example, among other ideas. I recommend that we study possible actions to construct additions to Basswood, Fernbrook, Garden City, and Rush Creek Elementary Schools, and at Maple Grove Senior High School, Osseo Senior High School, and Park Center High Schools. If the board supports the recommendation to study building additions, we would engage the services of an architectural firm who specializes in these types of studies yet this summer. This study would include the development of a timeline, concept drawings, and cost estimates. Any recommendation for action that surfaces from that study would require school board approval, communication with and feedback from community members. Funding for these projects may require a voter-approved bond issue. Lastly, I recommend that we study possible options to build a new elementary school on the district-owned property, which is located in northwestern Maple Grove. We would need to engage, of course, the services of an architectural firm who specializes in these types of studies. The study would include the development of a timeline, concept drawings, and cost estimates. Any recommendation for action that surfaces from that study would require school board approval, communication with, and feedback from the community. And I want you to be aware also in this situation, funding for this type of project may require a voter-approved bond issue. So you can see that the recommendations that I'm making to you, school board members, align with the recommendations that were made by the Enrollment and Capacity Management Advisory Committee. And at this time, I think Patricia and I are going to come back to the table and we'll just have a conversation then about what questions you might have and what you're wondering about. And then we're going to seek really clear direction on each of those 4 recommendations so that we know how to move forward now over the next few months. And since I have a dual responsibility as facilitator, I'll move back over and just begin with what observations you have about the report, questions for any of the staff members about the data, what you might be wondering about regarding the recommendations, questions about those recommendations, and then we'll just work our way towards direction on each of those 4 recommendations.
I have a question, and maybe you guys covered it, for reducing the attendance size area for elementary schools that you guys mentioned. Is there open enrollment in those schools? Can people open enroll?
Let me get the list of schools.
It was Basswood, Fernbrook, Garden City, and Rush Creek.
Yeah, 3 of those schools are closed to open enrollment at all grades.
Okay.
Garden City is the one that has capacity in a few of the grades.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. Number one, when it comes to predicting the enrollment decline at Zanewood, does that take into consideration the recent magnet school application of the district? Okay,
So that's one of the things when Gerald referred to breaks in pattern.
Okay.
That's one of those that we try not to try to predict a pattern until it emerges. So that's one thing we considered. It's similar to, you saw a box around kindergarten in our projection for next year. We wondered, would voluntary pre-kindergarten this year increase enrollment in kindergarten for next year? We boxed it because we thought about it, but since we have no pattern to base it on, we couldn't justify increasing enrollment. But we wanted the community and board to know that we thought about that. So I would put Zanewood in that same category.
and then secondly,
Brian, could you move from
and
my-
help me, thank you. I might have missed it, but in one area here, we're looking at removing, strategies to remove students from the attendance area of Basswood, Fernbrook, et cetera. What if we add space to those schools instead of removing students from the attendance area? Is that?
That's why we might not have said those words, but I view, and I think these guys do as well, that those as alternatives to one another.
Okay.
It could be that there's a combination of both, but they might be viewed as alternatives to one another. I don't know if either are feasible.
Okay.
And that's part of what the study will help us surface.
Okay, thank you.
I have two questions. One has to do with the way we do the predictions for some of the schools. For the traditional schools, I can understand how we can make predictions based on population trends and students graduating from one grade level to the next. How do we do that for the magnet schools? Particularly, I mean, I see that Birch Grove is on the radar for trying to do some recruitment, some publicity, maybe to try to increase size. But when we're crunching the numbers here in the report, how do we know if there's going to be a 2.48% projected increase at Weaver, or what was Birch Grove, a 4.75, when you don't have, when they're not community-based schools? Is this just some district-wide average based on an overall population, or?
What we do is apply the same cohort survival methodology to those schools. However, for both Birch Grove and Weaver Lake, there's limited enrollment. So we generally predict that they will fill their schools. What we know is that Weaver Lake fills its school and has a long waiting list. Birch Grove, in some grade levels, struggles to be full and does not have a waiting list. So it emerges in that way. And it's not at the average district capacity, it's below. So it just emerged from the data as a school to look at. But we apply the same methodology, however, knowing at those two schools that there's a cap and that we predict that they will fill each school. Hasn't always been the case for Birch Grove.
Okay. And my second question flips to the other end of the spectrum, deals with the high schools. The recommendation for study is to look at possible expansions at all three high schools. I guess one thing that I'm wondering about is, has an alternative been reviewed or considered by the group or by anybody at this point of taking certain programs from those schools and maybe considering a fourth high school rather than expanding three individual schools? I'm talking in terms of taking the like health science magnet program that's currently at Osseo Senior and maybe giving it its own space at maybe a new facility. I know that at Maple Grove and I think at Osseo we have capacity issues as far as arts programs go. If you go to a concert, at least at Maple Grove, there are kids crammed on the stage. That auditorium just doesn't accommodate the number of people that we have in those programs, and the programs are growing, and despite the fact that we're cramped for space. I don't know what it's like over at Park Center in that regard, but maybe the idea of having maybe an arts magnet or looking in that direction at a separate facility to try to offload some of those capacity issues that we have in the existing sites. So we're not necessarily doing 3 remodeling or expansion projects in parallel, but maybe considering a fourth new location. That might be a collaboration of maybe multiple smaller magnet or specialty programs. We might have something in there, occupational, Mike, help me out here. What's the current
Tech ed.
term for tech ed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that could be
Or
added into
trades.
the mix.
Yeah.
Welding, plumbing, electricians, all
right.
those jobs that are going unfilled.
But also tend to need space.
Right.
I can address part of your question, and you might have to address part of the question, because I don't know what the conversation was that ECMAC had regarding high school. So do you want to address that first, and then I can address the sort of another idea that I've been in conversation about. But
I would say that that's just out of scope for the work that we do. You noticed on the slide that Christian presented, the task force that set up the framework gave us a few choices. That ECMAC, because it's a data-driven system. So what we've done is surfaced questions, and possible recommendations were boundary changes, adding onto a school, closing a school, building a school, or doing nothing. I think that it could surface other questions about program that might solve the problems, go back into the framework and the data and come out with different data that would change our recommendations in the following year. But we weren't designed to give recommendations around programs. But as far as capacity and enrollment, if there's solutions that programs could apply to solve some of the issues that we surface, I think that's it's out of scope for us.
So thanks, because I didn't know if FMX had any conversations about that. I don't believe that formally ever in the school district that we've had conversations about like literally a fourth high school, and I don't know that that's what you're asking about. The property that we own in Northwest Maple Grove isn't big enough for a high school. It's big enough for an elementary school. Now, in terms of programs, the city of Brooklyn Park, primarily driven, I should back up, really it begins with North Hennepin Community College, has a vision for the property that they own across the street, across north of 85th, that North Hennepin owns. They have a vision for a community center, a performing arts center. It's a big, bold vision for that area of the community, and they have been in conversation with Hennepin County and the city of Brooklyn Park and Metropolitan State University for about a year now, just doing some brainstorming about what that could look like. What could a community performing arts regional center look like in that particular space? So they've invited me to, and several others have been part of that informal conversation over the last year as they explore the vision that they have for that quadrant by the new Hennepin County Library there in Brooklyn Park. They're at a point now where it's, they sort of have this vision for what it could conceivably be, and they're at the point now where they really have to do some kind of a feasibility study to see if there's going to be any traction behind it. So I've been involved in some of those informal conversations with them. And one of the reasons I've been invited and engaged in the conversations with them is because of our high school conversation that's occurring at ECMAC, wondering if that vision were actually to come to fruition, would there be any leverage or joint partnerships that could emerge out of that vision that would help us peel off some programming from our 3 comprehensive high schools in order to alleviate some of the enrollment press, which we anticipated when we did grade span change. I think that we'll know by the end of the summer if the board gives us direction to study the cost of additions to our 3 comprehensive high schools, and we have some cost figures to work with. I think we'll be close enough to know by the end of the summer, is there some vision for that for District 279 as part of that work or not? I think that's what we need to figure it out. And I think that over the course of the next 4 months, each of the partners engaged in that conversation are going to have to do the same thing. So right now, it's a big, big, bold dream that North Hennepin Community College has. And they have to figure out how to get serious now and see whether or not it might work.
Right, and just in the spirit of full disclosure, I mean, Dr. McGuire isn't telling me personally anything I don't know, because I was there for a good share of that conversation, but thank you for sharing that with the larger group. I think that's interesting information to have out there. I guess my only comment is, in general, as long as we have a group that's discussing all sorts of different options, even if it is a matter of curriculum or programming as opposed to facilities, they do overlap. And now would be the time to be, looking at these things instead of just saying, well, we're going to build in place or expand in place, and not really give consideration to the programs that are inside and utilizing these spaces. Because once we build a new space, then we're somewhat locked into it. So granted, this process has been rolling for a year. There's a ton of work, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours that have gone into this thing. But I think that the earlier we can engage some of these other ideas that maybe we haven't completely thought of, the better off we are. And if we don't go down that route, fine. But now's the time to speak up, otherwise we miss the window.
That's one of the reasons why I've been following that conversation, because we were working on enrollment and capacity, and if that was a viable option, it was worth being in conversation about. I don't think anybody knows right now whether it's a viable option, but I do think we'll be closer to understanding that by the end of the summer if the board provides direction and we complete the architectural study necessary to look at the costs associated with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I think Bob brings up a good sorry. I think Bob brings up a good point, though, about a specific school for like a high school. If we're going to try to increase attendance for Birch Grove, which is an art magnet school, you know, and those kids are really involved in art, where are they going to go after they are done with elementary school? What do we have to offer them that is art-centered, I guess? And I know that, yes, they have the baccalaureate.
Oh, Park Center has the
Yep.
baccalaureate. Brooklyn Middle. Park Center
Yes.
has the IB program, and yes, Brooklyn Middle has the STEAM with the focus on arts.
Okay.
Yep.
I just don't want to lose that, because that's middle school though, right?
Right.
So then where do they go after high school? Or, you know, if there's no art-centered high school, we can lose that big chunk of population.
Right.
So I think Bob brings up a
I mean,
good
as I
point.
understand, on the arts end, the students, if they wanted to continue in fine arts, they would flow up to
Rockford.
Rockford?
Fred Moore's a middle school. So in our magnet strand, we have, of course, you know, we want students to stay in our school district.
Right, exactly.
But because we're part of the Northwest Suburban Consortium, students could follow a strand of arts through to a high school, and our arts magnet is at Rockford. And we do have some students who go to Rockford as part of the arts program, yes, from each of the Northwest Suburban districts.
I guess that might be something interesting to look at, to see the trend, to see how many of those kids actually go from art to art to art school and do go to
Yeah,
Rockford.
we have that information through
Okay.
Northwest Suburban. Great
Okay.
question, though, and that's, again, one of the reasons why we thought this was an interesting conversation to pay attention to that was happening with North Hennepin Community College, just to see what their vision was.
Right.
Because one of the other interesting things of maybe, granted it's far-fetched, but the idea of considering a magnet high school, and granted lots of variables need to play into this, it doesn't just happen on its own, but the idea that unlike a community-based high school, this could possibly draw in students from the consortium, so it wouldn't be a matter of building a school that's way too big for our needs. We'd be able to fill in students that fill seats that wouldn't be occupied yet by local residents. So it wouldn't be a building sitting 80% empty until we waited for, say, Northwest Maple Grove to build up and fill in that population. We'd still be able to maybe potentially fill those seats. Granted, none of it's been studied, none of it's been considered. This is pie in the sky stuff.
Well, could you just, well, this is just another idea. I mean, could you switch a high school to be a magnet school that we already currently have?
Sure. All I need is $500,000.
I mean, I'm sure you can do
Yes. Exactly, we can do anything. We just have to decide if we like the implications.
Health
right?
sciences.
We could do a couple of things. I'm not recommending this. But we have the capacity through Northwest Suburban. So for example, if we wanted to apply for a federal, if federal magnet school grants continue into the future, and we don't know that yet. Now, we have Zanewood involved in the next round of grants, but if they were to continue, we could, as a consortium, apply again for a federal magnet school grant to get some startup money for a magnet school in any of our buildings. But we don't know if that will continue. You also have to consider, as you know, sustainability costs, so you have to think about that going into the future. And on our own, our school district, or any of the consortium school districts, obviously, could create magnet programs, either within a school or as a whole school magnet. In fact, Anoka has a strategy around magnet programming, and they've made some strategic investments in continuing to grow magnet programs outside of the consortium. So general fund money, setting priorities to create and enhance magnet programs. So we would just have to, if we were interested in doing that, we would just have to determine that it was a strategic priority and set aside budget capacity and, know what all the implications are. So I'm not recommending that programmatic change right now, but yes, we certainly could consider that in the future if we were interested.
I just wanted to say thank you to Patricia and Christian and Dale and Gerald and BJ, who's not here, and everybody else on the team who's taken so much time bringing me up to speed, coming late to the game. You've answered so many of my questions, so many that probably aren't even that relevant, but I really appreciate it. And I also was wondering, this didn't come out as one of the recommendations by the team, but, you know, especially with the conversation at the table here today, is what would it look like, and do we have the space to consider an addition onto one high school and not all 3 high schools that could be used as a magnet program? So we wouldn't necessarily be adding a whole new building, but I don't know, maybe we would need a whole building to do that, I don't know. So that was just something I was curious about that didn't emerge.
I think we could actually look at that in 2 separate ways. It doesn't have to be considered together. So maybe part of the question is, would one addition to one comprehensive high school do the trick? Is that sort of
Right.
part of your question?
Yes.
So
but
given,
to also include some of that specialty programming that we're talking about when we I mean, I think very clearly
could it
had a
peel
lot
off
of conversations
enrollment?
about,
Yeah.
you know, building up some of those other
Yeah.
programs.
Well, we'll be able to answer the first question this
Yes.
summer if the board provides direction tonight.
Okay.
We'll be able to answer the first question about costs for additions for each of the 3 high schools. Now, we didn't make a recommendation, but we could at the board direction. If the board wanted us to study, would one addition to a comprehensive high school do the trip for enrollment at all 3? Can you
Yep.
say more about that? 'Cause I
Yeah,
don't know.
here's what I'm thinking. The way I'm framing the question for a potential architectural firm is, given the land that we own,
Right.
and given the space you need for restrooms and common areas and with the hallways and parking lots and all those things that Dale knows about, how big could we make these schools? So
Right.
it's sort of a question of what's possible.
Mhm.
And then we could come back and go, wow, it looks like if we added on to one, we could solve our problem. So I think the study itself will start to surface, now what can we do next?
Sure.
Now, it's just to surface, is there even a possibility of adding on? Could it even solve our problems?
Yeah. Interestingly, we actually, when we started in on grade span change a number of years ago, our original recommendation was actually around one addition to one comprehensive high school.
Okay.
The implication of that, though, is significant boundary change, right?
Right.
So at the time.
That's
this-
why I was thinking the magnet idea, because
Right,
then it would
yeah.
be,
Oh, if it were choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it were choice. Hard to project, but if it were choice, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and the board provided direction around the 3 additions so that we could make a commitment around not making boundary changes.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? What are you seeking from us tonight? This is just a recommendation to start a study? Or if we go along with that, are you looking for us to automatically approve additions or?
No.
Okay. so-
Thank you, because what I'd like to do is to go through each one, and so that we're having conversation about it and that we're really clear. So let's go back, and we're happy to keep answering questions too, so let's go back through each of the recommendations and see if you have any questions on the specific recommendations.
sorry,
Yep.
Kate, just to clarify, we can make recommendations to add boundary change, any of those different things to be studied.
That's what I'm asking
All of
for.
them. We could potentially recommend studying all of the possibilities. Is that what you're saying? Or no?
I'm going to recommend to you that you provide direction to us tonight, which means really 4 people have to agree.
Right.
So I'm looking for direction to take action on each of my 4 recommendations.
Okay.
So thank you. What I'd like to do is go through each one, and then let's keep asking questions to make sure that we're clear on it, okay?
Okay.
So the first recommendation is the one about study potential attendance area adjustments that could be made in the future over the next 2 to 5 years in 2 regards. To increase attendance area size for Cedar Island, Crestview, and Zanewood, and to reduce attendance area size for Basswood, Fernbrook, Garden City, and Rush Creek. So let's talk a little bit more about what that means. So what does that mean, that we would study attendance area adjustments now? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Patricia?
I've talked with Troy Schreifels, our Director of Facilities and Transportation Operations and his team about what that study could look like. And what we would need to do is, based on our capacity and enrollment projections, we'd have to target an enrollment for those schools, and then they would go about looking at census areas that might solve the problem. What could be moved or adjusted, potentially moved or adjusted to get enrollment to the, to get projected enrollment to the place we need it to be. It could be that they can't find a solution. And it's probably for sure, as Dr. McGuire said, that it wouldn't just impact the schools on this list, because as you move attendance areas, they have to go somewhere. And if these 4 schools, at least 3 of these schools where we would reduce the attendance area size are neighbors of each other, it for sure wouldn't just affect those 3 schools. So they'd come back with some options. Here's some possible things you could do to adjust attendance areas, or they'd come back with a can't figure it out solution. But what I'm hopeful is that they'd come back with some options that we could consider.
So when you say attendance area, is that you're meaning
Boundaries,
change?
yes, yes.
And then one other question, like, how much do these studies cost?
I believe that we can accomplish the study between $12,000 and $17,000, something
all
like that.
4?
For all of this work, including help with figuring out a model for secondary capacity.
So that includes the architect's fees?
That's just for an architect to do a concept drawing.
Just the study.
Okay.
Right, not for design and other, because that would all need formal board approval. So we'd have to have some concept drawings, and they'd have to look at the property and see the size, and they'd have to look at the internal capacity of the building. Does
So
that make
$12,000 to $17,000 just to tell us if we need to change boundaries or.
They would not be involved in a boundary or attendance
just
area.
give us recommendations to change boundaries.
Nope. Okay, thanks for asking that question. It helps me clear. So let's just stick with this first recommendation. So this first recommendation on studying potential attendance area adjustments, we can do internally. Right? This is work that we've done internally for 30 years, only we've done it differently this time than we've ever done it before. Because in the past, this kind of work was just done as a regular part of daily work for enrollment folks who manage enrollment. And then we would alert the board when we thought a change needed to be made. So we didn't want to do it that way anymore, which is why we entered a different process for emerging recommendations. So now we're seeking permission to study what potential is there to solve the enrollment issue in these buildings, if any. And now remember, we're going to get to another recommendation next, which is about additions. So it could be that something around attendance area adjustments might work, or it could be that something that has to do with additions to elementary schools might work. We don't know that yet until we get permission to study them.
So this would be an internal study, or we would hire externally?
The first one, the studying potential attendance area adjustments we can do internally. When we start to talk, and jump in here if when we start to talk about additions, we need some other help to look at the physical facility, and that's where that consultant would come in.
So you're saying 12 to 17,000 internally or externally, whatever you do?
There's no cost for the internal study.
That's just
Our current staff could do that.
So if it's an external study, that's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to point out the thing about this process that is different, and this conversation is surfacing that. So if you remember that internal circle of staff work on the framework, conversations like this would only be happening internally, because when we begin to surface a school for a potential attendance area adjustment, it rightly starts to alarm families. And we would normally keep that conversation very close to the vest, because until we know something, we don't want to start having conversations about it. So what we're going to have to get ourselves used to is this new pattern where we are talking about things that we don't know if they will happen yet. So this is work we've always done, but we've always done it in a very closed circle because we don't want to announce something before we're sure about it. So now community members are going to be hearing about potential attendance area adjustments to 7 schools that we are not making we're going to consider them. So that's the price we pay for transparency, and it's the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. Can I just, this is just an observation, if we are looking at potentially adding or expanding, in particular Basswood or Fernbrook, it almost seems like that would eliminate the need for a new school, because the new school would be located kind of in that area. And so I'm just kind of wondering what the logic is behind looking at both a new school and addition and expansions of Basswood and Fernbrook.
Yep.
And I think
Well, that's the
that's
trade-off.
why we're doing the studies, because then we can compare the results
Okay.
and come to conclusions like the one I think that you're looking for.
I also want to add a piece of data that we didn't talk about in the presentation. I believe it's spoken of in the report. We do not have in the Fernbrook enrollment projections yet the impact of the growth in Northwest Maple Grove once 610 becomes completed. And so we've been working with the city of Maple Grove, meeting with them several times to make sure we understand when they think that growth is going to occur and when, residential homes will be built. We think it's at least 2 years out. This fall, I believe we'll start to build some of those enrollment projections into that 2 to 5 year enrollment. So the issues that are surfacing for Fernbrook, I think are going to get larger as we build that data into the projections. Isn't in there yet. So it could be that in addition to those 3 schools could solve the problem. But once we have new enrollment projections, it will help us understand. So that's the beauty of this model now. It will help us understand whether, we'll have the data about what it would cost to build a school and what's the feasibility once we have the projections that match it.
Now, one of the things I didn't see in here was looking at all schools, i.e., when you look at the arts program at Birch Grove, how many out-of-district students is that actually pulling in? Because it was designed in the integration district to pull more people, hopefully from outside the district. Are we doing any of that? And is it actually meeting its goal over there? Same thing with Weaver Lake. How many are coming from outside the district? Should we maybe consider those schools to be part of this consideration? If we open them back up to community schools, will that reduce the need for a $35–40 million new school? Will that reduce the need for significant boundary changes across the district? So that we ought to be considering all options when it comes to boundary changes for schools.
So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Where the attendance of those students are, where they came from, what would it do to those schools? Would it fill some up that are currently under capacity? Would it take some and put them far over capacity? But what would be the, and then if we did that, what would that new footprint look like?
I think also, just to add to that, if we were to switch them from magnet schools, how many kids would we be losing from the district also?
Well, at least in Weaver Lake, when we made it a magnet school, we lost about, 800? So, maybe we would be able to get some back also when you look at it from that perspective.
I'm just saying both ways.
Yeah.
So we would want 4 board members at least to provide direction on each of our recommendations that we're starting with, and then if there are additional things that you'd like us to take a look at, we would want to have some clear direction from 4 board members about what that is, so that we know what it is that you want us to do. What's the best way to do this? Should we start back with the recommendations that are on the table to see where you are on each of these recommendations first?
I would say let's do the quick review of what
Okay.
the total package is looking like.
Okay.
Rather than go through one by
Okay,
one,
all
and
right.
maybe get approval for one and not
Okay.
another, just to get a full scope for what we're looking for from the board.
Okay.
And then go through and get the,
Kate, could you pull your mic towards your
I'm sorry, what?
Your mic.
Oh, sorry. So the 4 recommendations are that I'm recommending are those that are outlined in the ECMAC report. Although the ECMAC report clumps Birch Grove with attendance area change, I separated it out so that we were very explicit about each of the things. So we're seeking direction to study potential attendance area adjustments, both to increase attendance area size at the 3 schools listed and to reduce attendance area size at 4 schools listed. At the same time, we would begin, as this is the second recommendation where I pulled out Birch Grove, was we want to take a look at Birch Grove and strategies to increase enrollment there within the next 2 years. We want direction to study potential building additions for 4 elementary schools, Basswood, Fernbrook, Garden City, and Rush Creek, and the 3 comprehensive high schools, Maple
Okay.
Grove Senior.
Can you say which ones you would do internal and which ones you need to do externally?
The one about the attendance area adjustments, we can do internally. Birch Grove, we could do internally if it's around magnet school marketing and marketing strategies. I think we could do internally. If the board provides some direction on attendance area adjustments, we could probably do that internally.
You could study the impact.
Yeah.
Different.
I think the only thing we'd probably need help with is if we were recommending, or if the board was going to provide direction around some kind of an addition or building modification.
Thank you.
And then we're recommending that the board provide direction on studying potential building additions, oh, I'm sorry, I think I said that, for both the 4 elementary schools listed and the 3 comprehensive high schools. And then lastly, that we study the potential for construction of a new elementary school on the property that we own in northwest Maple Grove. And that we would need help with this summer. Go ahead, Dale, sorry. Yes, yes, yeah.
And these aren't all like a one or nothing, all or nothing kind of thing. Like if a study comes back and says something about Basswood and Garden City, we don't have to include Fernbrook and Rush Creek, correct? It's
Right, and I
Right.
think the data may change as well, as you heard Sujata talking about, data fluctuates, and we are basing these on projections. So
Right.
we're surfacing these questions in advance, and so the data will change as so the data could cause us to drop one of these ideas, or the impact of the study, either the cost or the feasibility could cause us to reconsider them. But we're, again, doing this enough in advance that we can have time to react before we need to.
I think the thing to keep in mind here and just re-emphasize is these are recommendations for study, to get the information to come back later to potentially act on. And it, like you said, getting to what you said, it may not be an all or nothing thing. We might have 4 schools involved. The study would tell us that none of them are candidates. All of them are candidates. 2 of the 4 are candidates. We don't know that yet. That's why we're looking for the approval to do the study to get that information.
Okay, my question is I'm having a difficult time. To me, this sounds like an ask for money. So we're hiring an architecture firm to do the study. Of course, they're going to want us to spend the money. It doesn't seem like a study. This seems more of like, let's see how much it's going to cost to do this. I don't really understand the study aspect of it. I'm not understanding what, I don't know. I'm just having a little bit difficult time with this. I do not have a clear position on this.
I think one of the things that we need to be clear on is we've kind of done the study already and determined that there's a concern at these schools. And I can't, for one, say, is it feasible to add on to Osseo Senior High knowing the problems that we have with movement in the school right now? Someone with some engineering background and some architectural knowledge is going to have to help us understand traffic flow, traffic patterns, and all the support structure necessary to make some of these things happen. For us to give you a good recommendation, we need to have all those parts and pieces in front of us to say, in addition to an elementary school, is feasible for these reasons, but here's the trade-offs. There's going to be a plus delta on all of these. Do we want to have a elementary school with a capacity of 1,200? Or, so we have to make these decisions. And
I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we have all that information in front of you before we say, here's what it's going to cost. We need to say, here's what it's going to cost, and here's the plus and the minuses.
And the cost, the study that'll be provided, I mean, it's gonna say everything from, you know, staffing costs, or is it just architectural?
No, I think it's just the architectural costs, right?
Okay.
Right.
Because we can do that.
Right, and we're a long way from that.
Okay.
You know, it would be, we know from our experience building schools, and other districts obviously are building schools too, but we know that if, first of all, with that kind of an expenditure, we're likely talking about a voter-approved bond.
Right.
That's how you build buildings. So by the time you get there, which is far down the road, we also know, based on the size of the building and the enrollment in the building, we can project what the operating costs would be. So we know for every student in a building, you need, right, a principal and a secretary and X number of teachers and so forth. So and it's possible not possible, when you build a school, you have to build operating capacity to do that. And there's only two ways to do that. You save it up internally, or you levy for it as well. So you include that as part of your voter-approved operating bond referendum.
I just want to say, I think it's really important to go back to the beginning and why ECMAC was started, because we want to have transparency in this whole process down the road. These changes will be happening in our district somewhere at some time. So we have to really keep that in mind. Like, we want to have a hand in what's happening and how it's happening. So I think doing at least a good chunk of these studies is really important to make a appropriate decision about where we want to put our students down the road and what we're going to do with them and how we're going to do that. And I feel like we're getting a little bit away from that. I just feel like it's really important to bring it back to that piece, that's why we are making the decision tonight.
And you know, one of the things are the current activities in the schools achieving their goals?
Right.
If they're not, do we change those activities? Do we change those schools then, as I mentioned earlier? Same thing around, it wasn't me, looking at potential new things to bring into the schools. Curriculum that should be offered or could be offered that would attract more of the 7,000 students that have left our district to go elsewhere. To bring in students from outside the district that would lower our costs. To build some of that up. Like our neighboring districts have thousands of our students. So what do we do to bring them back? What do we do to bring their students into ours? What curriculum do we have to design? And therefore the buildings we need and capacity for that. And if we're going to start studying this, we ought to be starting to look at that at the same time. The money, the 12 to 17 grand is quite frankly minimal. If we can bring back 2 students, we just made that money back. So let's take a look at those options to increase our competitiveness with the districts around us to bring them in. And let's look at the effectiveness of the programs and therefore the assets we're using, the schools that are doing it today. And if they're not achieving it, then we need to look at that hard. I said from the beginning, we got to look at, what are the goals? Are they achieving the goals? Yes or no? If not, can we fix it? If not, can we kill it? So we need to look at how do we use our money and our assets effectively. That's
Right.
no, the studies. I said, we have some recommendations in front of us. I don't think we have all of the recommendations from a strategic standpoint to take a look at how do we bring kids back, what programs do we need, and therefore what assets do we need, and if we do bring 1,000 kids back, then what's going to happen? I know we're not being asked to do that. That's what I'm saying. It's, it was very clear when I started talking about doing things. Kate said we need 4. Okay, let's freeze out Mike. But let's take a look at what is going to be needed. I mean, unless we put a 5th option up there and explain some of those things, I'm not going to be happy with just looking at a small subset when we're at the beginning of what could be some massive changes. And therefore, let's take a look at more options when it's much more cost-effective to do so. Because if we wait 3 or 5 years when we've made some big decisions, then it's going to be much more expensive to implement those changes. So if we're going to start looking at it, let's look at some other things right up front. It's not going to cost us all that much. And it could save a lot of hassle, it could save a lot of heartache, and it could bring back more people into this district.
Thanks for that, Mike. The one thing too with the FMX team that we have to look at when we look at the framework is that even though these are the first couple recommendations, the team is still going on. So those ones that you're referring to, Mike, could be on there, and then when we come back from a year now, we can say, okay, these are the other recommendations as we continue to look at the first ones that we have on, on the agenda tonight. So the team doesn't stop there. We continue to go and we continue to bring things to the table where we could study to see if that, that could possibly impact, the decisions that we're making. Because, we're looking at 2 to 5 years down the line, but the FMX team continues to work on things every year, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
they were given, there's a certain charter that they had, and I don't know if necessarily the strategic direction of curriculum changes was a part of that, and I don't think it was. So, and they made good recommendations as a solid basis of how to start. But I don't think we can wait on some of the others because some of that will have direct impact. If you want to do, if you want to add curriculum that will draw more kids from outside the district or draw some of our own residents back into the district, that's going to mean higher capacity needs. So, we ought to be thinking about that at the same time, not develop a plan year one and then the second year come back and go, we're going to bring more kids in, let's do it all over again. Let's look at those options at the same time, concurrently. It just makes sense to do that.
I understand that ECMAC is going to be continuing its work. I guess maybe the way I would phrase the question is, do they have a suggestion box?
I would say we do.
We do. The
Yes.
report has ways to contact
Yes.
the ECMAC, but I think Mike was correct that, everyone's correct, that if programmatic and curriculum changes aren't something that we're qualified or tasked to do in ECMAC, but if programs emerge that we begin to see could cause a change in pattern in our enrollment projections, that gets built into enrollment projections and becomes part of the study. We aren't asking for curriculum changes at this time. It's just not part of the recommendation. But if changes start to emerge, new patterns in enrollments at different schools or at different grade levels, that certainly becomes a part of the questions we would answer.
But I think I see what you're saying, Mike. So for example, with CTE specific.
your mic
Oh,
further?
sorry, yeah. For CTE specifically, for example, if you're going to build an addition to a comprehensive high school, that we maybe don't want to think just about classroom space. That if we're going to go to voters for a bond, for example, we might want to think about, is there something that we should be doing to enhance, making this up, career and tech space, in order to draw students to a program or to create a program? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, we're oversubscribed in certain programs. We may be undersubscribed in others. I don't know. Again, we need to look at the effectiveness of each of the program. But if we're going to look at building, we built 3 years ago, and now we didn't build enough. So I don't want to build again, and, it's much more costly. The more you put it into the future, and the more times you're going to bring in the construction managers and everybody else. So let's try to look at multiple options before we go down a path of building again and $20 million at 3 schools. So, which was the last round. So let's get more options on the table. It's a lot cheaper now than it is down the road when we could have planned for it.
I think Maple Grove Senior High is a good example of that historically. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, as I've heard from word on the street, was back when that building was built, the auditorium facility was originally supposed to be bigger, or there's supposed to be more capacity in some form. I don't know if it's double decked or just larger or what. And that was shrunk down a little bit for budgetary reasons. So it's always been just a little bit adequate to maybe undersized historically from the day that building was built. A couple years ago, we add on to the building, we add more classroom space, we add more bodies to the building, but we have certain bottlenecks in the school that haven't really expanded. My own kids talk about, what's going on in the cafeteria. What's going on for music performances. You used to have more students in the same small, possibly undersized from day one space. It doesn't seem like some of those bottlenecks were considered when the more broad idea of we'll just expand the school to handle the extra capacity. That's great for traditional classrooms, but there are other points in the building where those considerations need to be taken into account. It didn't seem to happen in our most recent remodel, and now we're maybe talking about possibly repeating that same mistake again.
I mean, yeah, Maple Grove Auditorium was 10 to 15% undersized, at least for 3 grades. We added a 4th and we did nothing.
Right.
It's 50% or less, undersized,
But
or
didn't-
more undersized.
But didn't we hire an architectural firm to do a study to tell us what we needed to know?
I don't know what was in those studies, but I would have to believe that they would have made a recommendation along that lines. We probably said no due to budget issues, because the initial plan was $7 million and we ended up spending 22.
I don't know, Dale, if you have other additional information. None of us were around in these capacities in 1996 when we built Maple Grove Senior High to
Right.
address the urban myth about the size of the auditorium. But you have information about the most recent additions.
Well, when ATS&R designed that space and gave us recommendations at Maple Grove particularly, they designed it with the intent that there is another lobe you could add onto it that would add an additional traditional classroom space, nothing support services like you're talking about for auditoriums and that sort of thing. But at the time, we were trying to figure out what we could do to meet budgetary concerns as well as accommodate the students that were coming. The 9th grade was coming, and so we accommodated it in that way, and planned then in the future to do that second edition if, like Patricia was talking about, if those trends started saying yes, there are going to be expansions happening at Maple Grove Senior High, and that we could justify it. And that is true. We could add on to Maple Grove Senior. I don't know about Osseo Senior. I don't know about Park Center for that matter, because to see if it has capacity, if the infrastructure has capacity. And that's kind of what we're looking to find out.
Okay, well, just to wrap it up, I'll go ahead and support the study at this point and move on after that.
Board members, anybody else?
I'm having a hard time thinking about this because, you guys have done a great job showing us budget projections for the next 5 years, and, in the next 5 years, it shows we are going to be moving red, and I know you said if we have to add, build a school or add on to school, that we'd have to ask for voter-approved levies, and I don't necessarily agree with that. So my whole thing is our budget's in the red, we have to ask for voter-approved levies. We're gonna just continue to go in the red, and my goal is, we need to not be in the red, and that's really hard to approve something when, and I know this is just a study, but I'm thinking long-term, I guess. But I guess we have to know answers, so I'll go ahead with the study, just so we can know answers, and we'll have to go from there after that.
Well, we might not know all the answers. We might have more questions. But
Well,
it'll
we
get
gotta,
us-
we gotta start somewhere,
it'll
but
get
it's
us
just
the
hard
next step.
to say yes to something when projections have been laid out clearly for us that show us continually declining. So that's what's hard for me. But I will support the study so we can get some questions answered.
I agree with what you've said, Stephanie, but I do want to say that we might learn that we don't want to build anything, and so I feel like that's one reason why it's really important for us to do the study, so that we can have those questions to ask, I guess. Maybe more questions than answers, but I agree. I will go ahead and support this because I would like to know where we stand.
From the aspect of why we're here because of a lot of decisions that were made 3, 5, 6 years ago that got people up in arms with pitchforks, and the ECMAC was formed after that, and I think it's a very good thing that we have this open, transparent process. So from that, just looking at how we're going along today, yeah, we need to do these studies. I agree with that. I think we also, at the same time, now that we are thinking about this, we need to expand that to take a look at some of these other alternative uses for schools, alternative curriculum to bring back more students. What, 1,000 students is $12 to $15 million. That just solved a whole lot of budget issues. So we ought to be looking at that at the same time. You know, and you're right, we're constrained. We're spending $6 million more this year than we actually brought in. We have a reserve, but it's not going to be there forever. I mean, you know, it was in the paper the other day, giving people somewhat of the wrong thoughts of what we have to do, but we have to be concerned about that. You know, one way of generating additional revenue is capturing our students back into the district. 5 to 7 have left. Let's bring them back. And all of a sudden, our issues become much more manageable. So I think we ought to be looking, if we're going to do this, we ought to look at all options. And I would support that, you know, looking at not just general capacity increases to high schools, but what happens, what would it take to build a trades program here or an increased tech ed program there and things like that? Is that an extra $1 million? Is it extra $2 million? You know, and, you know, do we get 200, 300 students from our district to come back in, and all of a sudden we're doing pretty well. So I can support the general, you know, look at that, but I also want to put some things on the table to enhance what we're planning on doing now, because if we wait a year, we may have been making decisions that we shouldn't have. Let's get all the data on the table.
For my part, I will be supporting the recommendation to do the study. I guess my only comment to add on is I have concerns over the idea that right now it seems that a lot of the recommendations, a lot of the study that we're going to be doing is revolving just around head count. How do we accommodate head count, and how do we maybe shuffle around head count or expand to include more head count? And I don't think you can look at head count without also looking at programming at the same time. That the two are intertwined, and we're really, right now it seems like we're moving ahead only looking at half the equation. Granted, that wasn't something that ECMAC was charged to address, but when I hear statements of saying, well, you know, that really wasn't, you know, I forget what the statement was. They weren't really
part of the charter.
It wasn't their charge. It wasn't their scope. Again, you know, can that scope be changed? You know, going back not that many months ago, there was no ECMAC. That's a new group. The group has evolved even in its own existence to become what it is today. It'll be different a year from now. So maybe as we go through this process, we have this feedback, we now know that, oh, there are more things to consider. Maybe the scope of the job is even bigger than we thought. It's a big job. Nobody is denying that, and they've done tons of work, great work to get to this point. But there's, every time you dig into it a little bit deeper, you find there's another level of complexity that needs to be revealed. And I think that's where we're at. So the study that we need to do, I think, is good. I will, like I said, I'll go along with it. But I think there's other details we need to look at before the board would potentially be able to approve later recommendations that come out of the study. If the study is possibly incomplete, I would fear that those recommendations may not get a lot of support. So right now, I think that we need to move forward, but I'm more worried about what comes next, because then the $12,000, $17,000 will be wasted if we come up with a recommendation to expand and the board isn't satisfied that enough consideration for all the aspects of it had gone into it. That might go by the wayside, and the improvement or the expansion or whatever doesn't happen beyond that. So just a word of caution moving forward.
So here's how I'm thinking about it right now without any other information about it. I don't think it's ECMAC. If we're going to have a programmatic conversation, it has to be something else. I have no idea what that is yet, but we'd have we'd have to talk with the curriculum folks and the principals about I think about those curricular things.
The whole way we're doing this is new.
Yeah,
So, I
yep,
mean, there's
yep,
maybe
yep.
more new things that need to be done. And that's fine, just, we need to acknowledge that.
So I don't have an answer for what that looks like yet. And I don't know how it'll dovetail with timing. But I don't think it'll stop us. You know, Jim, I understand I haven't heard from you yet. I don't think it'll stop us from moving forward with at least an eye towards the head count enrollment for each of the 2 studies that we need assistance with this summer. So I don't, we gotta have a little bit more conversation about it. I don't think it'll stop us from moving forward with that. Don't know how to do the programmatic conversation yet.
And I don't know if we should move forward without that at the same time. You know, so, you know, do we table this until we come back and figure out how we bring that programmatic discussion into this, so that, you're right, so that if recommendations come to us a year from now to build, to do whatever, to make significant changes to the community, we say, well, no, you didn't look at this. Well, you know, well, it wasn't recommended that we look at this. I don't want that to be used, you know, as cover down the road.
Right.
I want to look at everything. And, you know, we're here to set, you know, the board strategic direction. There's very good tactical direction of what we ought to do from this standpoint, but we have to open up and take a look at what do we want this district to be, you know, and how are we going to meet the needs of the students? How can we bring more back in? How can we improve our curriculum? And a lot of that has to do with buildings and the capacity in those buildings to bring those students back and to give those services. So, you know, it's I think, very difficult to do one without the other. Maybe at the elementary, you know, I can support some of that, but certainly not at the secondary schools, because that's where significant curriculum changes could be for career advancement.
One of the things that I might add is this study at the secondary level would be pretty high level, because we wouldn't have the capacity even to drill down to that curriculum level until we got way deeper into the weeds as far as what that design would need to look like and so forth. I'm thinking more about, can we even handle 200 more students? The bigger questions like that. Do we have enough toilets? Do we have enough parking? Do we have enough all of gym space and all those other support pieces to even make that leap to this new curriculum design that we might be looking at, or something bigger in the future? Those are the kind of questions that need to get kind of sifted out before you even say, because you can get people all excited about a new curriculum that you can't support because it's going to draw more students, but where are you going to put them, and how are you going to support it, and where are you going to put the lab, and where are you going to put these meeting spaces and that sort of thing.
So, you know, if we bring 1,000 back in, then that's going to be 150 at each school. So let's not look at just increasing it by 5% over the next couple of years. Let's look at it increasing it 10 or 15%. So, you know, that's the type of thought, not only for classroom space, but also space for, you know, an award-winning robotic team with 90 kids on it has space less than half of this to store stuff, you know, and they're spread out in the hallways. You know, things like that. You know, there are excellent programs that are, you know, bringing kids in from the tech side and everything else, and we have no room for them, and it's limiting their ability to succeed.
I don't think we can go wrong starting in with the recommendations this summer, that the investment there is worth getting us started down the road on answering some of these questions, and I don't think it will prohibit further conversations about programs. So I don't think we can go wrong with making a relatively small investment this summer to help us answer the next questions on what we've posed so far. Jim, you haven't weighed in yet, I don't think, and then we can go back around if anybody else wants to shift.
So it sounds like to me that the real decision that has dollars attached to it at this moment is hiring the outside firms to find out our boundaries in terms of the buildings, the sites, what can the site support. So I definitely would like to learn about that, so I would support that study. And I certainly support the other studies as well, because I think more information will only serve us in the future. I certainly know that changing the attendance areas is going to be have to be done very carefully and thoughtfully, and that's how this process would start. So more information and plenty of foresight is what we need, and I think this is a good step in that direction. So I would support it.
I still have a question about one thing, Mike, that you brought up that we haven't gone back to address yet. So I want to come back to that. I haven't forgotten about that. So I just want to check in with everybody so far about my understanding. So let me know if this is not your understanding. That so far, I think we have direction from each of the school board members to move forward with what we've recommended so far in each of the 4 areas. I also understand that that doesn't preclude us from continuing to have conversations about curriculum, and that might dovetail down the road with whatever next steps might be taken or recommendations that might be made.
Well, could you show your 4 recommendations? Because
Sure,
for the
yes.
ECMAC, it's 3. So, how...
Yes, the one that we pulled out was Birch Grove, because that was a combined recommendation with the, I believe it was the first ECMAC recommendation. So they clumped it in 3. I just pulled that one out separately for clarity purposes, because it's different than attendance area adjustments. However, Mike, that goes back to your question about Weaver and Birch Grove.
Right.
So the 4 recommendations that we had on the table were studying for potential action in the future, the attendance area adjustments, both increasing attendance area size at Cedar Island, Crestview, and Zanewood, and reducing attendance area size at Basswood, Fernbrook, Garden City, and Rush Creek. The second one is where we pulled out Birch Grove separately, and that's to study potential strategies to increase enrollment at Birch Grove, which currently doesn't have an attendance area. And the third one is to study the potential building additions both at the elementary and secondary level. At the elementary level, Basswood, Fernbrook, Garden City, and Rush Creek. At the secondary level, each of the 3 comprehensive high schools. And then the last one is to study the potential construction of a new elementary school on the property that we own in Northwest Maple Grove. So those are the 4 that we asked about that I think I have direction on to follow through on the recommendations. Mike, you asked a question initially around, maybe it wasn't a question, but you made a comment or asked about Birch Grove and Weaver specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I heard you wonder, what would it look like if those schools were not magnet schools and had assigned attendance areas? And could that potentially solve any of the questions we're asking about elementary attendance? And what would the implications of that be?
Right.
Did I
Absolutely.
hear that right?
Yep.
Okay. So that was not a recommendation. Obviously, if the board provided direction on that, we would also look at that this summer. Now, I think that is work that we could do this summer, because it's about attendance area adjustments. We have the data on how many students are from within our district or outside of our district. Obviously, we have that data. That's just a different recommendation than ECMAC made, but if we had direction from the board, we certainly could do that too, and at least start to ask questions about that and learn about that.
Sorry. I would support that study, but I would also like to know how would that affect our relationship with the consortium and what those implications might be.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that yet.
That sounds like it would
Sure.
have to be part of the study.
Yeah, if we dismantled 2 magnet schools, basically, they can't be part of the consortium. So we would, I'm just kind of speculating here now because
Sure.
we've not considered this. They wouldn't be open to magnet school students. They would no longer be magnet school programs. They would have assigned attendance areas, I guess, is what I heard the question.
You can certainly open enroll.
if we didn't fill them from
Right.
other schools, yeah.
I would
Uh,
just
so
be
we'd have to-
curious, to know that, that
Yeah.
side of it.
So
too.
they just wouldn't be part of the consortium if they weren't magnet schools, because there wouldn't be any magnet school. There wouldn't be any movement. So they wouldn't be part of the consortium.
And they get a significant portion of federal magnet school funding still?
No, we don't
Or
have any more
they don't
federal.
anymore?
We've applied for a new federal magnet school grant.
Oh,
We don't
right,
receive
okay.
federal
But they don't
magnet
have it
school
yet.
grant funding now. We use achievement integration revenue to
Got it.
fund magnet programming at each of the magnet schools.
Okay.
So 2 questions that come from that conversation. When do we know about Zanewood, if their application gets approved?
They projected that it would be in the fall sometime.
Okay.
And our experience with federal magnet school grants in the past isn't that they're on time.
Yeah.
So it's typically later than they have projected.
And then, is there any way we can find out, I guess, for Weaver Lake and Birch Grove, are those students staying in our district when they go to middle school? Are they going to the consortium middle schools that are affiliated with that? What did you use?
The
Stream,
consortium, the
line,
strand,
strands.
the
Thank you.
whatever the strand
Yeah,
is.
so are they following that strand? Are they staying in our district? Are we losing them? Are we able to find that out?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, those are the questions I had.
Mm-hmm.
I remember looking at data, and I'm pretty sure we're a net exporter of students into the other magnet programs.
We are.
Right. So, we're not receiving much benefit then, if you look at it from that perspective. So why are we sending millions of dollars of tuition out every year if we're not receiving benefit in return by bringing in students to our programs? That gets back to the whole, if it's broke, fix it, or get
So,
rid of it.
One of the things that would be helpful for me is, and the reason I asked for 4 board members, Mike, is because these, the recommendations that we're talking about tonight, all of them, including that one, are significant, right? They're very significant and have significant impacts. And that's why we came to the board for direction on each of the recommendations, or whatever else the board members want to provide direction on. But it would be most helpful to have direction from at least 4 board members that you want to have that particular study done. It will also cause consternation. The 4 recommendations we made will also cause consternation. That's why we're talking about it, and we have a new process for talking about it. So it's of that significance that I'm suggesting that it's important to have direction from the board on that.
So we have, again, the options, and I just numbered them as we went down the road. The attendance area adjustments, that's option 1. I can certainly support that standalone. Study strategies to increase enrollment at Birch Grove, that's number 2. I can support that. Addition, expansion of schools, call the elementaries 3A, I can support that. 3B, the high schools, I can't support that unless we go with adding new curriculum options onto it, and not just saying, what do I need for the expected enrollment increase, but what do I need to provide additional space for programs that are currently, too small or can be expanded, that are drawing kids to the schools. So, that, I would like to see that added to the expansion for the high schools. And then we go to a number 4, the new school, I can certainly support looking at that. That makes sense. And number 5, taking a look at adding Weaver Lake, which is not yet a proposal, but closing or changing the boundaries and setting boundaries back to local schools for Birch Grove and Weaver Lake. We ought to be looking at that too, because that could solve or push back by many years the need to build in Northwest Maple Grove. So, I would suggest that. 2 small additional studies, 2 small additional things to this will gain my support.
I think, I'm not sure, so check me. I think I have direction from 4 or more board members on the 4 recommendations that I've made with the ECMAC recommendations. The one that I have a question on is Birch Grove and Weaver. That's the one that I have a question on still.
You know, what is your question?
I think I heard Heather say that you're interested in that, and I heard you say that, Mike.
Yep.
I'm not sure that I heard 2 more board members provide direction on that. And I just want to make sure that we have clear direction on the next steps that we'll take.
Yeah, I have a feeling if residents are going to say, especially ones that live near those schools who've been forced to move their kids all around and everything else, if we don't study that, which seems to be a small addition to this, we're going to get a lot of questions from residents of why isn't everything being considered? You know, why are we being left out around these schools? Why don't we get a community school? They had it taken away from them, and what did they do? They reacted accordingly. 800 kids left the district. So, you know, what are we going to do to try to bring them back? And community schools seem to do that a lot more so than the magnet schools. So why are we not looking at that, I guess is my question. Why is there a question of why we wouldn't want to at least include that in boundaries? What would it look like? Add these 2 assets back into the mix, and what would it do to the need for adding on at, what were the 2 main elementary ads on?
Basswood and Fernbrook.
What's that, Birch Grove?
Basswood.
Yeah, Basswood.
Fernbrook.
Basswood, Fernbrook, and Rush Creek.
In Garden City.
Garden City, thank you, that's the one I couldn't. So, since there's capacity over there near Garden City, why don't we look at it, since it's also well underutilized?
Just to clarify, this study of the magnet schools that would be internal, it wouldn't be external.
You'd have to work in collaboration with NWSI ISD, right? I mean.
Yeah,
it
we
wouldn't
have
cost us. We
data.
wouldn't have to hire somebody to study that, is what I'm asking.
You know, I think we could work through the numbers and the logistics of it until I think it through. We might need the help of a demographer or, you know, some other help, but I think just simply moving the numbers and projecting how many kids are coming in from outside, we have all the data. We would need to do that. It's a tremendous undertaking to pull that together because there would be a lot of assumptions embedded in what will families actually do, and projecting how many families we'd lose internally and externally that are already attending those 2 schools. There'd be plenty of assumptions involved. But we could do that internally, I believe.
Okay.
Well, I guess my opinion of it is that I think if we are going to continue competing against private schools, charter schools, home schools, we need as much variety in opportunity as possible. And that's not just giving more elementary schools that all give the same type of programming in the same type of space. The idea that we differentiate by having the STEM school, by having arts magnet school, gives people additional choices within our own district that helps us compete with some of these other entities that are nipping at us and stealing students from us. I'm all for studying it, but the problem is I can't realistically foresee myself ever agreeing with the outcome to change magnet schools back to traditional schools. So for that reason, I don't see there's much point in undergoing the expense and the difficulty of undertaking a study that I ultimately really highly doubt that I'd go along with. So for that reason, I'm hesitant to agree with going along with the study portion, because at least for me individually, it would go nowhere.
But by that logic, we have a couple people in this room who'd expressed significant concerns about going back to taxpayers at all for any new construction bonds. So why are we studying new construction bonds when there are some people who've made comments that they would be extremely,
No doubt.
against voting on that?
And that's why we have 6 votes.
Yeah.
This is where my one vote would be on this one particular matter.
That's fine. I think the studying I don't think is all that costly, that if we're going to study things, more things should be on the table. Things that cost us students the last time they were done should be on the table.
I just feel like this has gone.
To an extent, it has.
I don't know. I just want very clear, the study that we do on the architecture, the recommendations that you laid out. I just want very clear pros and cons. I don't have any opinion one way or the other on where we go with this magnet school study. I really don't, so I can't provide direction in that. Just hoping to get very clear pros and cons out of this.
I as well don't really have an opinion on the 5th option. I guess I think it's important that we attract students to our district, and I feel that magnet schools will attract kids. But I mean, if you look at like Weaver Lakes, and their enrollment is low, or their enrollment growth is projected to be low within the next 5 years. In Birch Grove, we're already going to study.
Can I just clarify that about Weaver Lake? It's because it's capped. So we fill it to its capacity, and it has a long waiting list.
Big waiting list.
Okay.
I mean, it's nationally
So thank you for
recognized.
sharing that, because that's kind of important.
A waiting list from outside the district or from?
Both. It's one of the reasons, I don't know if you remember us talking about this when we asked for the federal magnet school grant for Zanewood. It's one of the reasons we asked for permission to enter the federal magnet school grant application for Zanewood, because we know that the STEM has a waiting list. The idea, and we have a building with some capacity, the idea was, could we possibly attract more students to a thriving STEM program at Zanewood? Now, we don't know that, right? You can't predict for sure, but that's one of the reasons that we asked about it. So that's an example of programming, but in that case, our hope was for a federal magnet school grant.
So I guess that's why, I kind of agree with what Bob said about, I don't know if I would support taking those schools away, because as a teacher, I get questions. What does your school specialize in? Do you specialize in anything? Are you a STEM school? Are you a Spanish immersion school? Are you an international baccalaureate school? Those are questions parents want to, and they want to send their kids to schools like that. So for me, it's, I guess we can do a study, but I don't necessarily agree with it, because I probably would never support taking them away. So and we're already doing a study to increase attendance in Birch Grove. So I'm like Jessica, I don't know. I don't have an opinion, I guess, either way. It's hard to make an opinion about that.
And I haven't suggested we stop those programs. I suggest that while we're doing studies of boundary changes, we include those in there as an option. While we're all thinking about it, while the books are open and we're running the numbers, we ought to take a look at that. Is it cost effective? How many are we getting in from out of school? How many of our kids have we displaced?
But part of it is too, though, is they just shared there's a waiting list, so that clearly shows that there is interest for a school like that in the district.
Well, it shows that there's interest in those programs in the district. So why are we concentrating it at one and not looking at adding that curriculum across many? Why are not the rest of the schools focused on science and technology and engineering and math? That seems to be where everybody wants to head, so why are we only putting it in one?
And Zane Wood's applying.
Yeah, that's one, but we have 17. So, if the curriculum needs to be changed to bring more kids into all of the schools, that ought to be on the table at some point, so.
See if this is a possibility for addressing that interest in the future. In the past, our school board selected a voluntary integration program through magnet schools for compliance with the DSEG rule. So one of the things that we have to consider that other school districts may not need to consider is we're a racially isolated school district. We're covered by the Minnesota DSEG rule. Our school board has selected voluntary movement through magnet programming as the way to address racial isolation. If you don't address it that way, you have to figure out how to address it another way. And no school districts have opted for forced racial integration. So our district selected voluntary integration through magnet programming in, I think it was 2004, when we entered the first round of federal magnet school grants. So part of my hesitation around the magnet school study is the complexity around that with the DSEG rule is different than studying attendance areas for our other elementary schools. It just has different implications than attendance area adjustments at other magnet schools. This won't address your concern immediately, but there isn't any reason why at a future work session, which now, we're starting to talk about August and September work sessions already, that we couldn't talk more about magnet programming. It sounds like specifically at the elementary level to look at some of the data on movement. Now, that would only, all that does is provide more information, but at least it's a next step. That's just a suggestion.
Yes, we are running way behind on time. I've got a babysitter at home who's anxious. I think I propose that we just keep this conversation going and use another work session period to discuss it. I don't know.
The magnet school one, you mean?
Yeah.
We put that on into August, September. Yeah. Would that work for you?
It's going right after CTE. Which is fine. We have some time to prepare for that. So board members, what I'm taking away is the direction to proceed with the 4 recommendations that came out of the ECMAC report tonight. So that's the direction I'm taking away for action after tonight.
Yes.
In terms of next steps as part of the communication plan at the May 16th school board meeting, Patricia and I'm not sure what other team members may participate in the formal school board presentation. That is not to request action because all we need on this tonight is direction. We don't need formal action. So we're going to do the report again on May 16th at the regular school board meeting, but that is about communication, just staying in communication and making sure it's very public. So that will be one of the next steps. And then a second next step will be after tonight is we'll go back and talk about, okay, what do we need to do now for the next step on each of these recommendations and how do we stay in communication about that? Okay, that is what we're taking away for direction. And I just want to make sure that we're thanking the ECMAC members that are still here tonight and our staff members that are still here tonight as well. And I think we're done unless there's other questions with the work session. We're going to break and then we're going to go into closed session.
Are we staying in here?
Nope, we're going to go into N10 so Randy can help take down